All right. Hello, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Big Money Stylist podcast. I'm here with my trainer and coach, Courtney.
Hello, guys.
Why? I swear when we do a podcast together, it always gets a little spicy.
I'm here for that.
But you're like a super chill person, so I'm not sure why it goes that way. I'm always like, throwing shit. No, I'm not really, but it always goes a little spicy.
I'm glad I can bring that out in you. I'm glad you feel safe to go there.
I feel safe. I'm like, let's tear some shit up around here.
All right, let's do it.
All right. I feel like every week we're like, what do we want to talk about? And it's funny because it's like you can take the same topic, but we communicate it different, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's always based on like, what are we seeing inside of our students? So I created a hair extension line called Natural Beaded Rose. It's the original hand-tied hair extension system. I've had that going for probably 10 years. Did you know that, I don't know if I've shared this, but hand-tied hair, I started using it 20 years ago. 20 years ago.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And
it goes that far back.
It goes that far back. And you know what's so funny is I randomly went to these girls in Utah and they did like the old school cornrows on me and they used this hair and I was like, that weft is so thin. What is that? And they were like, it's hand sewn hair. And I was like, oh. And I was a hairstylist at the time. So I'm like, okay, cool. And so then I had learned, I've learned like so many different types of extensions, but then I started getting into like beaded systems because I like those better than the cornrows because the cornrows like
where your hair texture was just too fine and slippery.
And it didn't work and it was like bulky and I always felt like it never dried. So anyway, long story short, I remember in the beginning of my career I lived in Vegas and I would go in to buy hair and hand-tied hair was literally the lowest selling hair on the market. And I'm like, why did they always had so much available? And I was like, why is this so much, it's like cheaper than this other hair? And he's like, oh, because it's hand sewn and if you cut the weft, it just unravels. And I was like, oh. Anyway, long story short, I liked it because the weft itself was so thin that it allowed me to place multiple pieces of hair on one row instead of having like 5 rows in my head. Because originally when I had learned beaded rows forever ago, it was like you did a piece in the nape, you did a piece across the back, you did a piece here. I literally had 5 rows and my fine hair, it looks good in the before and after, but the minute the wind blows, you're like, cool weave, you know?
Gotcha. So it was too exposed. I felt like when I started, I actually had clients that would come down to LA and get an install done and then come up and I would just like try to figure out how to do it with beads and sewing it in, you know, because like that's what you do when you're a hairstylist. Yeah. Like I can look at this and figure this out.
YouTube
and it wasn't really like people were teaching it.
Yeah.
And machine tied wefts were just everywhere.
Yeah.
So I wasn't even exposed to actual hand tied weft until I started in BR. Everything else was machine tied. Well,
okay, so this is crazy. So I'll just share another backstory and then we can jump into my topic. But so when I started my brand, I loved hand-tied hair. I felt like I found a solution for my own hair, but I was told that like rows are cheap, you can't charge a lot. Plus the hair I was buying at the time wasn't cheap or was like not very expensive, right? And the big extensions were like great lengths and like individual, like any kind of bonded ones were really hot on the market. Tape-ins were really big. And I thought, I was starting my brand. I literally was like bankrupt, selling shit out of my house. Like I needed money, right? And I was like, I love these extensions and I need to elevate the brand because clients need to understand they're paying for an outcome. Like they hide better in my hair. I'm not at the salon for 9 hours. I'm at the salon for 3 hours. You know, there was like all these added benefits. And so that's how I started my brand is I'm like, hand-tied hair extensions and this type of hair, this needs to be elevated, right? I can't be charging $200. I was charging like $175 for a full install. Right now, I'm like, and my going rate is 5,000. You know, so it's like the brand itself had to be elevated. And as I started doing that, I realized there was like a gap and a hole in our community and our culture of hairstylists where they were YouTubing hair things and then like, yeah, just throw it in, but like that whatever.
Was so normal. Like that was so normal. Like we're self-taught.
Yeah,
we're entrepreneurs. We're self-taught. We're like, I'll figure it out. We have that like tenacity.
Yeah,
and then at some point you get stuck in this pocket where you're like, I actually do not know what I'm doing and I do need some help and some education. Who's been here?
There's no foundation for extensions, and that's really what made me passionate about creating the education that I have now. Is it was literally like, did you YouTube some shit and you went down to the local hair shop and you bought some hair, or you set your client down and you said just pick out whatever matches best, like.
I've done all of those things.
That's literally how I started.
And there's no shame in that.
That's how I started. I literally be like, hey, there's this hair. It's hand tied. You need to go to Sally's Weave Shop and you're gonna pick it up in 18 inches. And like the girl's gonna help you swatch it. Like I recommend the BL75, whatever. I'm like, but the girl that I had so much crazy shit. Like clients would bring in stuff. I'm like, ooh. You thought matched your hair. She's like, yeah, well, I want to be this color. I want to be a 10p. I'm like, oh my God, you're not.
Well, and I think that's the power of understanding, like, as a professional, like, that's us in our industry saying, like, hey, we need to take more ownership of this. And, like, we didn't know how. And we were doing the best that we could.
Right.
But when we tell our clients to pick out the colors or to buy their own hair, like, we actually, like, if a doctor, if I went to go see the doctor and he was like, yeah, just go pick out your own medicine and then come back.
How many
and then
cc's you want, girl?
I'll tell you how much. I mean, I would pick the wrong medicine. I wouldn't know what to do. So as the same thing happens to us in that situation, it happens to clients as well. So we have to take that ownership back and, like,
actually,
tell them.
That's actually a good topic, and maybe we could segue into that. It's because one of the things that I am very passionate about when I teach is that you are the professional, right? You are the artist, but as artists in our industry, we have given the clients so much control and let them dictate what they want. But yet we have all these hours behind the chair and all this experience, but we're still letting clients come in and we're still letting them dictate, hey, I know my hair. I know it's going to do this. And then as artists, we're stifling our professional voice. We're not saying like, hey, we're so scared of like this collision and being like, so we overpromise and underdeliver, and it should be the exact opposite. You should underdeliver and overpromise, right? And so for me, no, did I say that backwards?
Yep. We got it backwards. We had underdeliver. We want to overdeliver.
Overdeliver. My dyslexia just kicked in. But point being, I feel like we oftentimes as professionals, we give clients the power, right? And so that's why when everybody says, comes to me in classes and they're like, what do I say if my client says this? I'm like, you're the professional. Stop, get out of your feelings. And if they say they want this and it can't be done, it's a pretty direct conversation of like, hey, we can't take your hair from point A to point B. Or I know this brown piece of extension hair looks really scary, but you actually have these pockets of brown through the back of your hair. And if we mix this in, it's going to look beautiful. If I put in this straight platinum blonde, it's not going to blend, and I don't stand behind that work, right? So it's just like having that direct conversation instead of being like, well, she wanted the super light platinum blonde. She didn't want the brown. And then you're like cringing. You're like, it doesn't blend. Like, don't tell people I did your hair. But that's your fault because you didn't act like the professional and put your foot down and say, I'm not willing to do that. I'm not going to let my client bring in hair that doesn't match. I'm not going to install it because they've already paid for it and I know it doesn't blend, but I'm like, whatever, I don't care. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it's bringing me back to a student we had in class here for our academy last week, and she was talking about a very similar experience where her client was dictating, like, I'm getting these wefts, I don't want that, this is the type of color placement I want, and how she like felt like she never enjoyed looking at that, like, her art because it didn't blend the way she wanted to. And she was talking about that and just like, how do you move clients out of that? And it was really like, it has to start with you. Yeah. You have to understand. And I said, like, as hairdressers and hairstylists and artists, like, we are people pleasers. We want to give our client the inspo picture that they give when they sit down. Like, I see it and I'm like, yes, I want to give that to you, right? As a people pleaser, as an artist, those are the things we want to do initially. But you have to go and take that aside and be like, this isn't about me trying to give you this photo to be a people pleaser. I need to give you the best result that your hair will give.
And oftentimes, not oftentimes, clients want that. Like, they're trying to communicate to you what they want, but ultimately they want like beautiful extensions that blend, right? And so it's a conversation of like, maybe that's not possible, but this is what is possible. And this is like a funny story, but like I've had my boobs done 3 times. Okay. My first one, I was 18. I was just like, whatever. And they weren't great. And then my second one, I was like, I want small, natural, teardrop, soft gummy. Like, I was like, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted, right? Always hated them. The third one I went and I said, you're the professional. I researched you. I don't want to be too big. Here's some inspiration photos. What would you recommend? And he told me, and I was like, are you sure? And I was like, you know what? Okay. I need to like trust that he's the professional and like let him, like, instead of me trying to dictate exactly what I wanted, because that's what I did in my second surgery and I always hated him. And I'm like, like I went under the knife and all this shit, and like I never liked him. But my doctor should have been like, I don't think I kind of was like, why didn't he tell me? Like, that's not gonna. Yeah. So there's this like balance of like,
there's trust in that.
Yeah. So I finally went into the surgeon guy. I'm like, I've researched you. You are the boob guy. I'm like, I just need you to make them perfect. I'm not stuck on a certain process. I just want an outcome, right? So, and they look great, and they're the best ones I've had. And I'm like, okay. And so I think sometimes it's like, you have to go into an appointment like feeling like you trust your artist, right?
Well, you should have researched your artist and known, like, when I go to this person's feed and I look at their portfolio of work, like, they do no wrong in my mind. Yeah. Like, anything I get from them is going to be like beautiful because it matches the aesthetic that you're after. Yeah. And I think there's a huge trust. Like, I just had the best day in the salon on last Thursday. And this client came in and she sat down, and my initial thought was like, she needs depth, she needs dimension. Like, there's pockets where the sun wouldn't touch, where I want to change some weft patterns. She was getting new wefts that day. And I already did all of this in my mind in the first 30 seconds when she sat down. And she was a guest I hadn't ever seen before. And I was like, clearly she is like a horizontal foil, full blonde. Like, she's not going to want the things that I think. Yeah. And when she sat down, she was like, I just feel like I maybe want a little bit of like dimension.
And you're like, thank God.
And I was like, oh my God,
that's what I was thinking.
And when that happens and you connect with your artist or your doctor, when you have that like mutual understanding, that's when the best transformations happen. For sure. I feel like it's like when your client sits down and you're like, oh my God, like you can read their mind. Like, they might not have the exact verbiage, but you're like, oh, thank God, you're not scared of a low light. You understand that like you've been over blonded and now you need to put some like dark back in there to make your blondes actually pop more, right? So it's cool when you can kind of get on that same wavelength and you have a client that's like, here's what I think I want. Because oftentimes clients, like, they don't know how to explain it. So imagine trying to give somebody a result, but they don't even know how to explain it correctly, right? So you're like, I think I'm giving you what you want. You say you want more blonde, but you don't know. You actually need some dark to reflect more light, right? And so it's just, I always tell artists, I'm like, never be afraid to speak as the professional. Like, you are trained in this. And even if the client is telling you, like, I want to be really, 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 really blonde, and you know that the outcome is, in 2 weeks, that toner is going to fade out. She's going to feel yellow. Then you need to communicate that as a professional artist and say, hey, I can make you blonder. And I know that's kind of what you're thinking what you want. But in my experience, let me just tell you, in 2 weeks, this toner, like, explain to them, this toner is going to fade out. I think you're going to feel yellow. Here is what I would recommend. And if they're like hell bent on like, no, at least you told them like, hey, in 2 weeks, here's what to expect with your hair. And then when it happens, you can be like, all right, we had chatted about that, and here's how we can course correct that, like we said before.
Yeah, it's like you wanted to be really blonde, you were scared of adding any depth, then you need to come in and probably like for the 4 week mark, and we might need to retone it. And you need to understand that when I tone it, it doesn't make you blonder, it actually mutes it down, right? So even like explaining those things, like we're scared to explain like what we know, and so we're just always like people pleasers in the sense like, yeah, definitely. Oh my God, the girl, that's such a great idea. You're going to look so bomb. It's going to look so good. And in our minds, we're like, she's going to hate this in 2 weeks, right?
So absolutely. And if you have that innate feeling where you're doing it and you're just like, this, like, I don't feel like this is the best health for your hair. I don't think we should do this. Like, if you know those things, like, your client is asking you for a photo that she probably saw on Instagram or somewhere. One of her favorite celebrity has it, an influencer has it, she sees it. And it's like, it's our job to say like, hey, I think these pieces of this overall look would look great on you. Yeah. Let's keep you bright around the face. But for your natural color, maybe there's some more depth that needs to happen somewhere. And that actually makes them happier. And you're actually then pleasing them.
And it's so funny too, because I think one of the things that happens in our industry is we get stuck on an amount of foils versus an outcome, right? If I bring in somebody's hair that I saw on Pinterest or Instagram or whatever, my natural hair, I have like 4 strands of hair. If you overcolor my hair, I'm screwed, right? And I will pay you top dollar. I always tell people, I'm like, I will pay you top dollar to not overcolor my hair. Like, please don't overcolor my hair and make the process way more complicated because you booked a full head foil and then I show up in your chair and I've got 4 strands of hair and I really just need 12 foils. Like, don't overcolor me. So that's another thing I always say, like, as a professional, like, really kind of get out of your mindset of like, okay, I need to like over coloring and I got to get my money's worth or whatever it is. Like go after an outcome when you're doing hair, like the end, like, and explain that to your client. Does that mean you have to discount your prices? No. No, like I said, like I will pay you more. If you give me 75 foils and you ruin my hair, I'm not going to come back to you. If you give me 12 foils and I'm out of there faster and I have a beautiful result, I'm going to keep paying you and referring my friends and everything you need. So it's like even coming down to like if you have a client like me that shows up and just being like, hey, I thought we were going to, based on our consultation, we were going to need a full head foil. Turns out here's what I would recommend. And you don't have to feel weird like, oh, and I'm going to charge you less because it's going to take me half the time. It's just like, this is what I'd recommend. And as a professional, I think that we forget about our reps behind the chair, and that doesn't mean that you should ever like discount your pricing, right? Because you have experience.
I think this is like the beautiful little gray area that you transition. Like we're talking in our hairstylist brain. If you're a hairstylist, you're resonating with the things we're saying. Like we're going through behind the chair moment. But now it's that moment where we're talking about like the work that you're putting in, the foils, your product, your pricing. And that's really like the unique thing about the Academy is we are able to bridge that gap between being just an artist and talking about hair and talking about foil work and wanting to give your clients this style that they're looking for, this extension outcome that they want, but also being good business owners while doing it.
And holding a frame as the professional. I think if you like call yourself just an artist or just a hairstylist, like you're not even following your own boundaries, right? Like if you're going to set your boundaries that you don't work Saturdays or you're going to charge this, like you have to stick to them, right? I always think like whenever I've grown so much in my career, and whenever I'd be like pissed at a client, I'd be like, I allowed that to happen. Right? Like she canceled on me and I let her do that multiple times. And even though I said I had a cancellation policy, I didn't respect my own boundaries because I really like her and she drives clear from LA and she always gets stuck in traffic. And then I was like, no, I don't fucking care. If you know there's traffic, I still have to apply this late policy with you even though you're driving in. You know what I mean?
The craziest thing, it's like popping this story in my mind right now. I remember having a cancellation policy and I had just started. I knew you needed one. I had this cancellation policy. I'd worked in another salon. No one ever had, like people were canceling right and left. No one was upholding anything. I get to this new place and I'm like, okay, great. I'm so excited. I'm like booth rent. I've got all these things. And then I see all these other stylists who are like in the back, in the break room complaining about someone canceling. And then I'd be like, well, did you do it? Did you like hold to your cancellation policy?
Yeah.
And they never did. And I realized, you know how you stop getting cancellations?
You follow
your cancellation policy.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's so funny how it works and the answer is so simple.
I'm always baffled too. I've been in salons where I'm like, how did you get a no-show? Like, I'm like, how did you get a cancellation? Like, that should never happen. Like, number one, you should have a cancellation policy and you should have a follow-up. Like, even if you send out an automated text through your books, I never trust that. Like, my girls at my salon, and even going way back before I had a receptionist at the salon and all that, like, I would send them, like, something automated response, but then I would personally text them and say, hey, I'm just confirming our appointment tomorrow. If I didn't hear back from them, or like maybe it was like 2 days ahead. If I didn't hear back from them, I would say, hey, I will be removing you from your books unless you confirm. Please confirm. Like it, and then all of a sudden be like, oh, girl, sorry. Like I didn't even see your text. I'm like, oh, no, you are not going to no-show me because I'm going to take you off my books and fill that spot, right? So I was always confused when I would work with people. I'm like, how do you have a gap on your book? That's your fault. Stop being mad at your clients. Set your own boundaries and follow them, and then create processes and again, act like the professional. Like be more than just the artist. Like if you want to run a successful business, you can't let people walk all over you, and you have to get out of your feelings of like, oh, then she won't come to me. No, she'll respect you. She'll continue to come to you, and she will respect you.
And if she doesn't come to you, then clearly you guys aren't aligned. You had mentioned something about having gaps on your book. So sometimes a cancellation will happen, and I understand that clients have things come up in their life. And I'm not saying be cold and don't be empathetic to that, but definitely respect your business, respect your time, and hold your policies in place. And another thing that I saw happening a lot is if there was a cancellation or somebody did have a gap in their book unexpectedly, it automatically meant like, you're going to Target and you're leaving. Like for some reason, if you got to someone canceled, like, well, I guess I'm going shopping now.
Yeah.
And it never occurred to me that like
stay and work. on your marketing.
Do your marketing.
Yeah.
You now have a 2-hour gap specifically dedicated to just business on your books.
So in the beginning of my career, before I had kids, I that would happen to me a lot, and I'd be like, oh well, but I almost was like, yay, I gotta go to Target. But the minute I had kids and I was paying for daycare and my overhead was higher, I was like, oh no. And that's when, like if I did have an opportunity, I'm like, hey, where can I hustle a little bit and like, let me follow up with all these DMs that I'm so tired at the end of the day to follow up with. Like, let me like reach out. Hey girl, you're still interested in extensions? I actually have time to do a quick consultation if you're available, right? Like, so we get to this place, like there's always so many little pockets where we can like go hustle a lead. And maybe it's not like to obviously fill that spot, but then you're like, oh my God, I just got another like, $2,000 hair extension client because in that 2-hour break, I followed up with 4 DMs and sent out a few emails and texts, and I ended up closing somebody $2,000 into hair extensions for next week, right? So it's about like being effective with your time as well. Like if that does happen, it's like you already committed the time to work, just like because for me as a mom, I'd go home. And I would be so tired. And then I would go and write my blog posts and send out my email list and like organize whatever my next class was. Like it's just, it was rough.
But so. I think that's a difference of being just a hairstylist and understanding that you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And setting yourself apart. Like just a hairstylist is going to be like, I had a cancellation. That super sucks. I'm not going to uphold my policy. I'm going to go to Target. I'm going to like just live in the moment and only think about being behind the chair.
Yeah.
When an entrepreneur is like, I am behind the chair for my trade.
Right.
And then when I'm not behind my chair, I have my front of chair mindset in.
Right.
And I'm thinking about business and I'm using my time wisely.
Well, and it's funny too, because one of the moves that I made in my career is I was working like every day, but I did have gaps or breaks or whatever. And then like when I had kids and things like that, I was so tired because I felt like I was working every day, plus then trying to work on my marketing. And people always ask me, do you schedule in your marketing? I'm like, yes, that's why I actually condensed my days. Like it became a numbers game. I'm like, my highest paying service is hair extensions. I'm only going to do hair extensions and I'm going to consolidate it into 3 days. And I called it the 3-3-3. And it was like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I did 3 extension clients a day. And the minute I did that, like I didn't double my income, I tripled my income. But the other thing that I did is on those Tuesdays and Thursdays when my kids were in school, I was writing blog posts and I was creating content and I was constantly hustling on social media and sneaking into those DMs and trying to get consultations and just hustling. And the more abundance I had of leads, then it was like, oh, okay, now these 3 days, my value became so much more. So then I have a price increase, right? And so that's really how I got to the level of success behind the chair is I was like, people are like, you only work 3 days a week and you make what? And I'm like, yeah, because I'm not charging like $1,000 anymore. Like it's $5,000 to sit in my chair and I take 3 of those a week and I take 9 of those a week. Like you do the numbers, that's great money instead of just saying like, oh, I got, 2 extensions this month or whatever it is. Like really it's so important to like run a successful business, but also do your numbers and find out how you can be the most effective with your time as both behind the chair and in front of the chair.
Absolutely. And then when you go home, you've done your clients by trade, and then on Tuesdays and Thursdays you've done your business.
Yeah.
And now you're home.
And you're not burnt out. It's so hard to be behind the chair
all the time.
It like really is. Mentally,
props to you that are doing that still.
But I would challenge you not to. You will burn yourself to the ground. Like you will. Like I see funny Instagram memes all the time where it's like a reel when you're like, when your 7 p.m. client walks in and it's like they're chugging their coffees and I'm like, it's funny, but it's sad.
Yeah.
Like in a way I'm like, but why are you still doing that? Like that's really hard to sustain for that long and that exhaustion level doesn't mean more success, right? So it's like really about being effective with your time and go away from just that artist mindset, right?
Well, and then it puts you on this roller coaster, right? Yeah. Where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm hustling it. I have like 6 days this week that I'm working and I'm taking X amount of clients every day. And then all of a sudden you get a couple cancellations in a week and then you're on this really low and you don't know what to do. And then you're on this roller coaster of high, low. I'm making money. I'm not making money. I'm making money.
It's less consistent.
Yeah. Where if you schedule it and you have like a set schedule for behind the chair and for operating your business,
it's more consistent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those waves don't come and go like they used to.
Yeah, it's funny. And for those of you that are listening, I feel like a lot of times when we speak to more than just the hairstylist. But this podcast, I feel like, was very specific to
We're talking right at you guys.
We're talking right to artists. But if you guys, I'm sure there's a lot of you that are listening and is like, Yeah, that happens to me. Like, oh my God, yeah, I
patterns are patterns,
get it.
No matter what industry you're in.
Yeah, for sure. So it's like, again, that's like why I was so passionate about like not only, you know, educating artists, but it was like, I want you to have a life. I want you to like be able to like hang out with your family, your kids, take a trip, like, but still have abundant lifestyle and still have success. And yeah, you're going to have seasons of hustle, right? We're going into the holiday season.
It's hustle season.
I feel like for artists, we always joke around like it is because clients all of a sudden need to get in every 3 weeks instead of 6 weeks. You're like, why do you need your hair done?
But at the same time, you're like, that's what the market's doing and I'm going to go with it.
And you're like, but more money and hustle and like, I get it. So it's like, like take up those like seasons of hustle, but also like going into next year, you guys, what I would recommend is really take a look at your numbers, decide what services need to go, what services need to stay, what policies do you need to implement inside of your business, and what boundaries do you need to create for yourself and stick with them. And I feel like as we're kind of approaching the end of the year, this should all be stuff that you guys are thinking about in fourth quarter. Like what worked this year and what didn't, and how can you make those changes? Like take a minute. Like I know it's not quite the end of the year, but seriously,
still good to reflect right now.
Take a minute and be like, "Okay, where are my numbers at? What do I want to do and what do I not want to do? How can I create more abundance for myself next year, but still like love being behind the chair?" So I feel like that was a good way to end it.
I love it. I'm here for it.
All right. Well, this podcast, we were speaking directly to hairstylists. I have an academy program. It's a year-long program. It has 4 phases. It's done both in person and online. Excuse me. We do offer open enrollment for that. It touches base on coloring and cutting and hair extensions, and of course, business, marketing, and sales, specifically designed for the artist. So if you guys want more information on that, go to mbr.education. and research that. I also have an online course that I just launched. I'm super excited about it because I all of my in-person classes have really been reserved for academy students because I'm not really about like just like I really want the best for artists, right? And it comes with more than just like a one-day certification class. So that's really why we developed the academy. But I do have an online course. If you're like, what is MBR? I just want to like get my foot in the door. Again, you can find out more information on my online course on mbr.education. So share this with your friends. If you found any value in it, keep listening every week. We have a new podcast every Tuesday with myself, one of my trainers, or whoever's in town and I can snag. And I'm like, get in the podcast room. We're talking. We're talking about it. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.